the question that their customers are really asking them, it kind of boils down to, so wait, what am I paying you for? Exactly. Yeah, because they may be questioning the reports. They may be questioning the metrics. They may be questioning, the deliverables, and some clients may be asking just for more because they're like, oh, well, you can do this faster because you're using AI, right?
Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
So today on the show, I'm very excited to welcome back, there is a friend of the show, Leah Leaves, who is with Alderaan Operations, doing really interesting stuff on the ops front, because I think a lot of the times operations can kind of be dealt with in this high-level nebulous way, and Leah is actually placing operators inside of agencies and seeing what's going on on this in the trenches levels. I think she has a really interesting perspective. I'll go through her official bio. So Leah helps digital marketing agency founders escape the owner-operator trap without blowing up their businesses. It's very, very fun to blow up a business. I don't know why it gets such a bad rap, but it is a little painful. So as founder and CEO of Alderaan, she embeds seasoned operations directors and part-time digital project managers directly into remote agencies to install the systems, leadership, and structure founders need to scale without constant firefighting. So Leah, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, of course. So we're in this interesting time. It feels, we're recording this on January 22nd. We're going live a lot faster from the recording date than we used to, for better or worse. I think it's good because it does add this current flair. It's bad because we're always trying to scramble to get stuff live. But I guess my first question is with AI, with everything, with everybody kind of in this weird moment with, economy tumbling, what are you seeing out there on the operations front with agencies?
Honestly, the same issues, just at a 10x or 100x speed, right? So a lot of agency owners and founders are dealing with some of the same headaches that they have, for past 3, 5, 10, plus years, but it has accelerated because of AI. And I think it's something that people have known about, that over especially the last, 12 to 24 months, with the speed of AI tools improving, and the acceleration of these tools being deployed, across all different functions, of businesses, is that it is unearthing, those issues, that people have kind of just smoothed over, passed by, or done quick fixes to. But when you have that quick fix that you need to do 100 times faster for double the amount of clients, for example, then you still have the same issues. You're not actually solving the root problems. So we're still seeing again some of the same issues, where the agency owner is still typically the bottleneck, and whether that is they are still client facing and they are still jumping into strategic conversations with client relationships rather than having their team own that, from end to end. So that just eats into their calendar very, very quickly. Or it could be back office things. It could be that they're still, and I hate to say this, still doing bookkeeping, or they're still managing payroll, or they are still handling, administrative functions, for themselves, like their own email and calendar. And I'm not saying oh, just let AI take all of that. I'm saying no, there are still areas for improvement for systems, for better ownership and handing off, those items to other individuals. So delegation. And yes, yeah, you could totally use AI for some of those pieces too. But it's same issues, just hyper speed right now, warp speed.
Yeah, there's a lot of different directions we can go there. I think the first one is can you talk a little bit about how, from the client's perspective, what kind of questions are clients asking the agencies when it comes to AI these days? And a lot of the times, this can be variable by the industry and by the situation. So if there's any examples you can give, that would be really helpful.
Honestly, it's quite similar across a lot of the different agencies, that we work with, in digital marketing, advertising, to creative and even dev shops. The question that their customers are really asking them, it kind of boils down to, so wait, what am I paying you for? Exactly. Yeah, because they may be questioning the reports. They may be questioning the metrics. They may be questioning, the deliverables, and some clients may be asking just for more because they're like, oh, well, you can do this faster because you're using AI, right? So instead of, for example, with content creation, like instead of doing, one blog post, a week, it's, I want a blog post, every day, and I want it in a day, for the next, month's worth of content, because the clients, are expecting that it's now like at a one click, a button, that it's just all produced, without any flaws, without any humans in the loop, etc. And so they're really questioning the deliverables, and the execution components, of what the agency's projects or retainers look like. And that's where, for a lot of those agency owners, the emphasis has always been on, or I shouldn't say always, has often, been on trying to become more of that strategic marketing partner or advertising partner for their clients. I think with AI, it's even more so needed, to elevate out of execution and deliverables and just checklist items, into more of that strategic marketing partner, where it's about decision making, it's about trend setting, or trend forecasting. And at the end of the day, most of their clients, when they're coming to them with some frustrations, some aggravations, it almost always boils down to, well, wait a second, again, why am I paying you $5,000 a month, versus just having my internal team, whip up something with like a $20 a month, tool like ChatGPT or something. And there's so much nuance and complexity that goes into what agencies do, that they have to emphasize that strategy and the strategic value that they're bringing ever more so.
That makes sense. And I wanted to kind of answer that question a little bit better, or like to dig into what that would look like. So the question is, what am I really paying you for? So your clients that are answering that in a better way than others, like how are they answering that question? If that makes sense.
Ooh, that is a wonderful, wonderful question to ask, because we see it actually in a couple of different ways. So one is that they are really leaning into the human connection and the relationship aspect, like more emphasizing, the client journey and experience. And so they're improving all of those touch points because, yes, maybe they have created, the systems to execute those deliverables faster. So great, they're reinvesting that time into the client experience. So they might actually be spending more time with clients, on Zoom or Google Meet, and having those deeper level conversations about the business rather than just those project or status update type of meetings. So that's a really big one, is they're reinvesting back into the client experience. Another interesting way that I've seen several agencies adjust to this is where they have built these incredible tools internally for their team, again, to improve the services, to improve the deliverables, to improve the quality, of their service. And they've now productized those tools that they've built or the systems that they've engineered to then either sell to other agencies, so they can benefit from it as well, or back to their clients. So they're really taking the time and energy to be thoughtful about where they're reinvesting their efforts, and all of that gained time, gained white space in their brains, from automating certain things, or using AI for certain elements. They're really reinvesting back into that client experience, reimagining what their products and services look like. And actually, one other area that I should mention that we've seen a number of agencies start to shift into is that they are being a more strategic with their own, business infrastructure and operating model, and they're outsourcing that execution. They're white labeling it from someone else, to do those deliverables so that they can reinvest the margin back into their strategic managers. So that's been an interesting way that a lot of agencies have adapted as well, is really, looking at how they're structured, to support their clients long term.
Yeah, that's interesting. The experience thing, I'd love to kind of double click on that a little bit, because it's one of those things that like it's one of those things that I found to be tough to sell, because it's one of those things where it's like, I came for X but stayed for Y. Like I came because I needed somebody to solve this problem, but I stayed because the experience has been so good, or I can't imagine like not having these people around to help me. So my first question is like, are you seeing that same dynamic? And if so, is there any way that these agencies are selling the experience? And if you have any tangible examples of like what that experience looks like are they sending swag? Are they like meeting up in person more? Like what does that tend to look like? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say that the ones that we have seen that have reinvested, back into that client experience have not, at least from what we've seen with, our clientele, have not seen it translate into their positioning yet. Because I think you're exactly right that most of the time they're still solving for a very acute pain point, and deliverables based issue for their clients, rather than the emotional transference, that somebody might be looking for. But it is exactly that of they came for X, and then they stayed because of Y, and so the improvement there is then client retention, has increased, for these agencies because of the time that they've spent reinvesting back into their client experience. So the measurable is less on the front end of, like the sales process, and more on the back end of client retention is increasing for them because they are taking that time, to be really thoughtful and intentional. We have seen a couple of practical examples, and I'll say genuinely like spending more on the clients. So like you mentioned with like swag, for example, we have seen like more gifts, and more thoughtful approaches to gifts instead of just doing, especially like around the recent holiday season, we saw an agency that instead of just doing like one blanket holiday gift for all their clients, they actually created, a prompt that took into account their client notes, about like each of their different accounts that they were servicing, and more of the context and the history, of those accounts to generate, better gift ideas within a certain budget that they gave it, of course. And then they had somebody, because they'd done this kind of as a test case, and so then they had one of their internal team members, who then followed up on it, and bought all of those individual gifts, and they were all customized and personalized in a different way. So it's really beautiful to see like just how they're contextualizing, the information that they have, about the accounts, but using it in a more humanistic approach. So that was definitely one, is like more of the tangible, items. The other one I mentioned a little bit before was also taking the time to spend more attention and focus, on calls with clients. And this has been a really interesting, one for one agency in particular, where they have been working on really digging into better questions about their clients' businesses, rather than just, again, coming to the table with, okay, here's your status update, here's your report, let's go over it, here are our strategic recommendations, and keeping it really contained, to just kind of a rote, agenda. They may have those items and then they expand into where else are there areas of your business that we could potentially help support, and without asking maybe as directly as that. So they're finding better ways to ask deeper questions that build the relationship, and build that human connection so that the clients or the customers of theirs are really sitting back and like, oh, wow, like not only, do you know so much about my business that you're coming, with thoughtful questions, but like you actually care, and you're asking, about how this trickle down effect, is impacting every area of the business rather than just like this little sliver that we came to you for.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to kind of bring this into the topic of hiring and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, there's a lot of different frameworks for thinking about when and who to hire, whether it's a revenue level or headcount level or something else. Can you talk about that? Like, what is your framework for hiring operations talent? Like, when should owners be thinking about hiring certain titles when, and how are you thinking about that?
They should always be thinking about getting themselves out of the operations seat, because that is one of the biggest, longest bottlenecks, that they could possibly be in. And so I'd say the moment that they're out of delivery and the day-to-day, at least, of service. So maybe they have had a project manager, account manager, maybe they have, some marketing strategists, that are really handling, again, at least more of the day-to-day, maybe not 100%, but 80%. Then they should be really considering that operations support internally, because that is where I see a lot of agency owners get stuck, is that they may get a lot of help on delivery, and that's where they mostly need it, and they bring in, junior level strategists, or specialists, they'll bring in, again, project managers, account managers, which is great. They're getting more and more support, but then they kind of hover, and they keep an eye on things, and they might jump into things, and escalate, and we call that the reluctant gatekeeper, where they have to always kind of keep an eye on something because they don't 100% let go of that. And what happens is that then all of the admin, operations, HR, recruiting, finance, keeps building up on their plate because they're used to playing in like marketing strategy rather than like business operations. And so if they want to genuinely be like chief strategy officer and CEO, maybe that is something that they want to do. Others may only want to be CEO and ultimately just, in the owner's seat. But whichever case that they want, there's so much of the day-to-day business function that needs to be handled, and so I'd almost always have them look at not a virtual assistant for this. They need to start looking at titles like operations manager, or sometimes you might see it as like online business manager. It's a more of a generalist role where they can handle a lot of different things. They can step into, again, HR and recruiting and finance and administrative and tech support, and that's where they can relieve a lot of the agency owners' frustrations and pressures, and again, the bottleneck, for a lot of those pieces. As they continue to grow, what we typically see is that by the couple $1 million mark, and above is when they really need to start thinking more strategically, not just, again, at the execution and the management layer, but then I really need somebody, that can think like a leader. And I need somebody that can step into business strategy with me. And that's when it starts transitioning into, I may need an operations director rather than just like an operations manager. So
Yeah.
as the manager can just do the things and build the systems and keep it running, but a director can really see around the corners and help them grow more sustainably.
That makes sense. So let's say we're talking at the manager level first. You're placing a lot of these people, if I understand right. What do you look for in a good ops manager?
Ooh, interesting. I mean, I have a whole scorecard, for it. But really at the end of the day, what I'm looking for, is that they are highly adaptable, to any situation that comes their way, that they have systems and structure in their personal life, not just their professional life, like they live and breathe this, so they're the people that have, checklists, before they go out for like the weekend camping, they make sure that they have their own boundaries, as well built into their schedule, so they have work-life balance, so they're very rooted in systems and structure. It just comes, quite naturally to them, and they definitely have to be a bit of an all-arounder. And what I mean by that is they are dealing with a lot of different personalities because they are touching vendors and team members, and they're talking with the owners, and they might have, their own support staff that they're managing as well. So that comes into being, an all-arounder where they can be a people person, but hold the line, right? They need to hold people accountable. They need to be able to understand the infrastructure and the architecture of what they're building, for different systems, as well as communicate and translate it, into all of those different languages. Like, say that they're building, the infrastructure for, sales admin and sales management. Talking with a sales rep and having them use a system, like just for lead capture, and notes, from a sales call is completely different, than talking to, let's say, a brand designer, and instructing them, on how to use, like ClickUp, for their day-to-day tasks. So they have to be very, very adaptable, and have great communication skills, and just be naturally, well organized. I think that the other key piece that we particularly look for when we are, matching the right operator, with the right agency, is the core values and culture fit. Because yes, on paper, they may look like, a rock star, operator, and they'll have all the operational skills and all the team building and team management skills, and, there are certain core values, that every agency owner has, whether they have written them down or not, they have them, and so it's a matter, for me to really extract that information and understand what really do they value, because then we can match the right operator, with that right agency and make sure that they're coming in with the right level, of understanding for the agency of like, okay, how much can I just like run on my own, and just get stuff done, and that the owner is going to be totally fine with that. Or as I mentioned, like the reluctant gatekeepers, how much do I need to elevate the visibility of what I'm doing to the reluctant gatekeeper, so I'm keeping them informed. So it might be an extra step for them, to always keep elevating or reporting up, to the owner, make sure they feel in the loop, that they feel like, oh, I know what we're doing, before they just like run through with stuff. So it's really about the personality matches, just as much as it is about skills and
Yeah.
technical fit.
So the personality match, that makes sense. You've got to collaborate with your clients to figure out who's going to be a fit. Let's talk about though, like, let's think of a situation where you're interviewing a bunch of ops people and you're disqualifying them quickly from that interview when somebody else that doesn't have the skill set you have might have like had them keep going or even hired somebody that you know is not going to be a fit. Is there anything that jumps out to you like that, like a litmus test sort of question, not a gotcha question, but something that's like, okay, this person is probably not a fit for this, that other people might not appreciate?
Yeah, so two things come to mind. One is, when we are, and we have a pretty rigorous, recruiting process ourselves. And so when we see that anyone is hesitant, to want to be in the weeds, like in the trenches, say, and how they might articulate this, is like, I really love building the systems. And you're like, okay, and because if they aren't saying like, I love building the systems and maintaining them, I love building the systems and training somebody on them or teaching somebody on them, like if they just end with, I want to build systems, they're more of an architect, rather than an individual that can maintain and manage, and influence and empower others to use the systems.
Right.
So we've had a lot of operators, and sometimes like that's their sweet, special spot, that they love to come in and they're more of like a specialist in that regard. Maybe they come in, they build a system, and then they're like, okay, hands off, have somebody else own it. Yeah, and our operators, like, they need to build it, manage it, delegate with it, all of those things. So that's definitely one area, that comes to mind. And then one that may seem, a little simple, but honestly, it comes up for us a lot in our recruiting, is if they don't have prior agency operations experience. Yeah. That is an instant disqualification, because honestly, you can work with other remote service businesses, you can work with other great, B2B companies, other small businesses, solopreneurs. But if you haven't worked in an agency, you may just not truly understand the agency culture. Yeah. And that I'm gonna, I hate to say it, but like a little bit of that hustle culture, still exists in a lot of agencies. Like it's still very chaotic, it's still very fast moving.
Right, because you have different clients, often in different industries all the time, versus like there's no other niche that's going to have that level of differentiation and chaos like on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
that all makes sense to me. I guess thinking about like the next level up. So I've got ops managers or ops people, and I'm an owner. I'm still involved in building these systems, and then other people are running the system. And I need to get somebody that can actually build the system, if I understand right, if that's kind of the right framework. how am I thinking about that? Am I doing an internal promotion to identify the right person that's already understands us and see if they can up their game? If I am hiring out of house, like what are the qualities I'm looking for? How are they different than the other things that you've talked about? And I think I've run into this on a smaller scale with trying to get the people that are good running the system to create the system and failed at it miserably in the past. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and it's definitely a special skill to be able to do both, to build the systems, think big picture, but then also be able to come down into the trenches, and notice the details and maintain it and manage it on a day-to-day basis. So typically when we're seeing like instead of that ops manager, now you're looking at that ops director, or above kind of level. I'd say some agencies, the larger, they are, when I say larger, I mean you're getting over 10, 20 people, you may have somebody internally that you could consider promoting. That being said, I don't see it very often. I see it more often than not, you will need to look externally, and obviously I'm very biased toward fractional, workers, because I think they can come in with the expertise that you need, build the system, manage it, maintain it, and then as you grow, you can always consider bringing it in-house as a full-time, role. But especially at that director level role, what I look for, often, is a few things. One is at that level, they need to also have very strong financial skills and financial acumen because they are dealing with things with more complexity, like your P&L, budget. They are looking at, more at the capacity management, not just resource coordination and some of those, finer details of do we just have enough people on the bench? You're now looking at, how are we optimizing our team's, performance, and how are we potentially improving it? So it's a more strategic skill. And at the director level, they need to have kind of like one foot in strategy and leadership, and then one foot in the trenches, with the team and execution. So it's definitely something that we look for, of people say like, oh, I love being in the weeds. Like I can totally do that. Or as we call it, like the messy middle, where again, they can see the forest for the trees, and the real important piece, particularly as you continue to grow and as you have, big vision for your agency, is finding the right ops director, or operator, that can help translate your vision into a strategic plan. Because I'll be honest, it's not enough, in my opinion, at that level to just run the systems, and build, the infrastructure, just to make the day-to-day smoother. You need to have an eye toward the future, and this is where some people may say like, okay, you're getting a little bit into not just director level, but like VP level or, C level. Yeah. And I'll be honest, the smaller agencies, like, yeah, you are asking for kind of an all-in-one. You may not always get it, but you can always ask for it. And then in larger agencies, when you're getting over, let's say 8, 10, 20 million, you'll have those roles separated. Typically, you'll have like a COO with like an ops manager, for example, or a COO with an ops director. But the smaller agencies, if you're looking for that all-in-one, then you are having somebody that can help take those big ideas of, I want to be here, I want to be a $10 million agency in 3 years. Like, wow, okay, we need to be building some of the systems today that can sustain that growth trajectory, over those next few years, rather than, oh, we're just building the systems for today to fix the problems of today. Right.
Yeah.
So that's the difference with a director typically.
And what I was just going to say is like one thing you said earlier is like figuring out if they actually want to be doing the sort of work that's going to be required of them. And it just reminds me of making sales hires. And like, it really comes up a lot where you'll be in an interview for a sales hire and you'll be like, what are you most motivated to do? What do you really like? And it's like the second or third thing somebody will say will often be, I really like working with clients. Like I really like, the relationships I'm developing from like working through a project with somebody. And it's like, and it sort of becomes clear, like, oh, they want to be an accounts person. They don't really want to be in sales. And usually with salespeople, they're like, I like closing deals. I like making money and like that kind of thing. So you have to really kind of listen for like, what are people passionate about? So I think that's helpful. So we started the conversation with talking about kind of getting owners out of the bottleneck, that the usual challenge and so on. I've had a lot of conversations recently with people that have sort of said like, this agency is AI enabled. This other one's not AI enabled, as if it's a binary. And I'm also just like, what does that even mean to be AI enabled? I imagine it's a continuum. Like there's, if you think of like a company run entirely by a robot that you talk to, it would be a 10 out of 10. A company that's never logged into ChatGPT is a 1 out of 10. But can you talk a little bit about your clients that are like removing these bottleneck issues, that are getting owners out of the day-to-day more? Maybe they're using AI. Like what tangibly are they doing differently? And how would you describe that?
Yeah. Yeah, and we're starting to see it, as described more of like a bionic organizational chart. So there are, more seats that are actually owned, on the org chart, by AI, but they're next to humans, as well. And so it's documented, of what the human is responsible for versus, what the AI is responsible for. And that's one of the first things, that we see, with agencies that are becoming more quote unquote AI enabled, that have more of a strategic vision with it, is they're going through systematically, okay, where are not just the owner, but where is anyone, a bottleneck, and where could we, potentially, improve upon that? And then what is the right solution for that? Is it AI, or is it a different human? Because for example, when we look at, agency owners that are still the bottleneck with like client relationships, almost always there are two parts of that. There is the administrative, function of just keeping up to date, with the client, making sure that you're sending them the weekly update of like where we're at, where we're going, what we're working on next, and that can be AI based, but then there is the front part, which is the client relationship, and yes, there are some tools out there, of course, that are AI enabled that, can be client facing. Most of the agencies that we work with, are finding they're not that ideal yet because they take a lot of additional training, and it's easier, honestly, right now to still have a human, be like the project manager or the account manager or the strategist, the client facing interaction, because most of the clients of theirs still want a human that they're working with. They're kind of like, oh, okay, I know you'll be using AI in the background, and I don't need to know for everything that you're using it, but I still want to work with the human first. And so to get the owner out of that bottleneck, it's, bringing in, the right project manager or account manager or hybrid, and then enabling them with the right AI support, and it's like a very practical example of this is something that we've seen over the last couple of years that a lot of agencies have started using is we're all on like Zoom or Google Meet. We almost all still have, different AI note takers, right? Well, there were so many agencies, that had these AI note takers, for years now that weren't doing anything with them. They might use it in an escalation if they ever had to reference back to like what a client said, because like a client would say like, oh, I never approved that. And then it's like, actually, no, we have the recording, but that's the only time that agencies would typically have to go back to those recordings. And I hate to say it, but it would be the owner that would be pulling up that recording, of someone else, like their team member or their own, and manually going through and finding that information and then having to have another call with the client, about it. And I almost happily can say that has reduced dramatically because most agencies that we work with now, have some background system in place to take all of that data, all of those transcripts, all those recordings, all those notes, and compile them into, a project that's, whether it's, for example, like a Claude project, or a ChatGPT project that's labeled specifically for that client, has all of that context, or maybe Notebook LM. There's lots of different tools, that a lot of different people are using, but that is just like even the tip of the iceberg. They're just getting it all in one place, that the AI, can then read from and understand that context. So then when something happens with a client, the project manager or the agency owner, if it's still them, has one source of truth that they can go to. and they can extract the information that they need much, much faster. It improves a lot of the communication. It improves even the client strategy. So there are so many ways that like we've collected all this information over the years, and like now I see agencies are actually using it. So it's really improving getting them out of certain bottlenecks, like client escalations, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like the note takers and so on are kind of the forefront of like where a lot of this work is happening, whether it's, escalations or account management stuff or creating content, like ideas that would have never borne fruit or taken shape or like now like exiting the womb because they're happening like organically in these conversations and so on. So it seems to be where like a lot of the work is being done. And it's funny because like we're also in this period of like whatever, all this slop and all this content that's like clearly AI and it's not fun. But I'm also like, we're also in a period where there's like ideas that are coming out that probably wouldn't even exist because of like the latency, right? Where it's like there's a lot of latency and, going through your conversations in the previous week, thinking about if any ideas came up, losing half of them, writing a blog post versus like having a system where all these nuggets kind of like can take shape. So I think that's really interesting. More to be seen, obviously. So Leah, kind of getting towards the end of our time, where can people go to follow what you're up to and learn more about how to get better at ops?
Yeah, so there's really three places to find me. One is I'm on LinkedIn practically 24/7. So you can always find me on LinkedIn, and chat with me there. We actually have a new email newsletter as well that you can go to our website and sign up for. And then, our website, has everything that you can ask, about us. We try and answer, ahead. So those are the three places, LinkedIn, our email newsletter, and then our website.
That's great, Leah. Really appreciate it. Always learn a lot about ops, which I think never gets enough focus and enough credit. So it's great having you on, and let's do it again before long.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was such a pleasure.
Likewise.